And welcome everyone to Kopernik Observatory and Science Center this evening. So happy to have you for our discussion on clean energy systems, how you can transform your home. First, as always, we like to get started with a little overview about what's coming up. I also want to say hello to our live audience there. We are streaming this program out to YouTube currently on our YouTube channel, and we can talk a little bit about how you can interact with us there as well. Kopernik.org is where you go to find all of our upcoming programs. We have a whole slate of exciting topics coming up for our fall schedule. So look out. There's a public program schedule out in the lobby if you want to pick one of those up on the way out. I also want to mention a big program coming up, and tickets are selling fast, is Hocus Pocus, which is our Halloween event. So there is registration for that online. If you go to our events section on our website, that'd be the place to go to find where you can buy those tickets. Look out for that. Also, an event called, actually a class called Girl Power on November 11th is coming up pretty soon here. And that's going to be a whole day class. It's on Veterans Day. It's an opportunity to come up and actually build your own rocket. If I recall, actually I have the flyer here. Let me double check the grades. Yep, that's for grades 3 through 8. And that is something we run on average twice a year. So be on the lookout for more of Girl Power programs. I do want to skip over to the YouTube channel for a moment. So this is our YouTube channel, and if I refresh the page, I believe we will see that we are streaming live. So this is the event for today, and this is all of our upcoming live streams. We have different acronyms to define what's what, so you can see those in the lower left-hand corner. This program classifies as what's called an FNL, and that is a Friday night live stream. Then you have NSL, which is a Night Sky Live. Those are our observing events. We held one of those recently as a lunar eclipse preview. Oh, there I am. That was a pretty neat event where we got to learn a little bit about this lunar eclipse that's coming up in November. That is November 8th. But we do a lot of observing events like that. We did cover, if we go, oh, it's not going to show up. But we did cover the lunar eclipse in May, and that was a little bit more convenient timing. We'll have the chance to cover this one in November as well, but it's going to be, you can see it's scheduled for 2:30 in the morning. So it's a little bit of an early bird or night owl event, but we'll still have fun with that. You can always watch after, because we always post the recording afterwards. So great place to go for either those Night Sky Live, FNL, or last one I'll mention is the KRXN, which if you know your chemistry, that is Kopernik reactions. So we did a reaction stream on the DART impact. That was a phenomenal event, and they did find out that they shifted that orbit by more than 30 minutes. So they were expecting a success at greater than 7 seconds. So
that was the asteroid?
That was the asteroid, yep. So they shifted that period, and that was now that wasn't an asteroid that was going to harm us, but that shows the theory is solid. You can shift an asteroid's orbit, and if you get ahead of it in time, we can prevent impacts here on Earth. I'm sure that's making the dinosaurs very jealous. I think with that said, we're about ready to get started. I am very excited for this program because this is actually what I finished my degree in the spring. Sustainable energy systems. So I'm excited to pass it off to Adam Flint here, and we'll get started with the show.
I did not know that. Well, thanks very much everyone for coming, and for our virtual audience, and thanks Jeremy for setting up this amazing AV extravaganza. If I had known this was Friday Night Live, maybe we would have prepared some sort of humorous skit, but we didn't, so we're going to have to forge ahead. Yeah, if you want to bring up the presentation there. So my name is Adam Flint. I direct clean energy programs at Network for Sustainable Tomorrow. This is Anna Pertel, my colleague, who's the Sustainable Energy Coordinator. And we're here to talk about a program called HeatSmart Southern Tier. A little bit about our organization first. It's possible some of you might have heard of us under our older name, which is Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition. NEST has really two areas of focus, and this is one of them right here. We do education and outreach to all kinds of audiences to primarily help people make energy improvements on the buildings they live or work in. We also catalyze and convene new initiatives. And so, for example, the Southern Door Community Land Trust is one that we are still fiscally sponsoring. This is a land trust, maybe not the kind that we often think about to preserve relatively wild or wild lands. This is to preserve affordable housing. So this is what we're going to be talking about tonight. Now, because we're here at Kopernik, we're going to delve a little bit more into the technology, but we're also going to talk about, as we always do, the incentives and the financing for this. And I'll be handing that over to Anna. We're also going to talk a little bit about community solar in addition to heat pumps and energy efficiency. So I think you are the only one that doesn't have the handouts, and Anna's also going to pass around a sign-in sheet. We are paid by NYSERDA to do this, and they like to know that we're doing our job. So if you would be willing to put your information on that sign-in sheet, that would be great. The paper that you have in front of you, there's two packets. The first one is what we're going to talk about first. So we're going to talk about energy efficiency for buildings and two kinds of heat pumps, air source and ground source, sometimes known as mini splits for air source and geothermal for ground source. So the HeatSmart Southern Tier program, which one of these is the little red light?
The center one will.
Center one, okay. Yeah, because I tend to hit the wrong button and then it brings us back to the beginning. So as you can see from this map, there are what are called HeatSmart campaigns across most of the state of New York. And the role of groups like ours is to bring information about these technologies, about financing and incentives, how you go about getting assessments, and we competitively select installer partners that I'll talk about in a minute. So this is one of many measures that we can look at in terms of what we have to do here in the state of New York. This indicates the sources of greenhouse gases, and you can see that transportation and buildings are far and away the biggest sources. And buildings are very challenging because with transportation, particularly with passenger vehicles, a typical passenger vehicle ownership might be anywhere from 5 to 15 years, right? That's not how it works with buildings. Buildings are durable. They're around for a long time, and they're idiosyncratic. That means that they are often very different from one another. And since we're in the Northeast, they're also kind of old. And so retrofitting those buildings is a big challenge. There's a lot of opportunities that also come with that challenge. So we're now really going to talk about transportation, but that's a whole other area that other colleagues are working on in the state. There's the area of personal transportation, which could mean moving from an automobile to being able to do things on foot or via bicycle. Could mean that we expand transit opportunities. Could mean that we have car share or ride shares and other possible services to reduce the amount of miles we travel in general. And then, of course, there's electrification. So really, one of the themes of this is electrification of everything. Buildings, transportation. Obviously, electrification relies on what do we use to generate our electricity, right? New York is actually in a relatively good position in the United States in terms of its electricity being less dirty. I guess I would put it that way. Does anyone know name one of the top 3 ways New York generates electricity? Anyone tell me? Hydropower. Okay. So we have dams up near the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway that have been around for decades. Depending on what's called the fuel mix for a given year, it might be 18%, 19, 17, 20% of our fuel mix for electricity comes from there. What are the other 2 big ones? Yes? I wish you were right, but alas, no. Since you mentioned wind power, between wind and solar, the state is hovering between 6 to 8% of our fuel mix is coming from wind and solar. So I'm afraid renewable generation kind of is bringing up the rear. There's two other big ones we're missing. Yes, sir? Nuclear is in the 20s in terms of percentages. And we're missing the biggest one. What's number one? No, coal is pretty much dead in New York. In other states, that's not true. Yes, gas and dual fuel. So there are some older plants that can burn oil as well. But that is the biggest, and it's also the reason why we experienced some very severe pain financially early this year. Some of you remember who pay bills because of the lingering impacts of the pandemic and also because of the war in Ukraine. The price of gas and the availability of gas became a bit of a problem. And so that obviously becomes a problem when you're using gas to heat or to cook, but it also becomes a problem if you're generating electricity with gas. So one of the many reasons to get away from fossil fuels, obviously greenhouse gas and climate change are existential reasons. That is, for the younger people here, we want human beings to have a future on this planet that is at least something like it is now. And we really need to move quickly to remove those kinds of fuels from our civilization if we're to do that. But also, fossil fuels, oil, gas, a lesser degree coal, are what are called global commodities. And what that effectively means is it honestly doesn't matter who the president is or what the leader of XYZ country does. The price of oil is set on a global market, and it depends on lots of factors that no one entity controls, right? So Russia produces a lot of oil. There's a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia. The US produces a lot of oil. But those are what are called very volatile priced commodities. Whereas electricity, particularly if it's being produced by renewables, is much less volatile. So the sooner we can get away from those fuels, the less financial pain we experience also. Now, there are other important sources here that we're not going to go into depth, but unfortunately, the way that our economy has evolved over the last century and change, we have what's called a take, make, waste approach, right? So we extract resources from the earth, one way or the other. We make things from them, and we throw them away. And that results in a loss of embodied energy. To make this chair, make this building, took a certain amount of energy. And the more we can keep that in service, the better. There's a whole lot more we can say about that. Refrigerants actually becomes relevant in our discussion today because heat pumps use refrigerants. We'll get back to that. For agriculture, this is a low number because we're in New York to some degree, although New York has a pretty large and diverse agricultural sector. But think about the impact of the fertilizers and pesticides that are used. Think about the machinery that is used. Think about bringing things to market and bringing food to market. Yes?
What's the last 3%?
The last 3%? That's a good, well, it's a sharp one. The true answer is I'm not sure what exactly is in that last 3%. Does anybody want to take a stab? What are we missing? Let's think creatively. What sort of human activity is not showing up here? You have any idea? All right, we'll come back to this one because maybe I'll remember. What's that? No, heating and cooling is buildings, and that's actually what we're going to talk most about. So that's an example of a question that I don't have the answer to, and my usual answer when I have that is if you're curious about that, we will find out and get back to you. And I think it's going to be as simple as Googling, but because there is actually, I can tell you all the source. The New York Independent System Operator is like the traffic controller for electricity in the state of New York. So they keep data on every imaginable thing having to do with power, and this is where that comes from. Even though it says DEC, they're not the ultimate source. All right, so in terms of the program we're here to talk about, there are a number of benefits of electrification and energy efficiency of home heating and cooling. Energy cost reduction, home comfort and safety. When you're not burning something in your house, there are fewer things that can happen that are related to that are bad, including fires, including the inhalation of carbon monoxide, spills. In my house, we had an oil spill back in the day when we had number 2 oil. That set me back $5,000. Not good. And we also had to have our fuel delivered, right, whenever we started to run low. We now have a geothermal system, which I can talk about later. Reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's great. But I'm also seeing home comfort and safety. Yeah, we should put health and safety. Because another thing is that the less point source combustion that's going on near us, the better. What do I mean by point source combustion? So that's burning stuff, right? Where you live, where you drive, where people are. So we may have power plants that are in various places that are burning stuff, and that's bad. But when you have a gas furnace or an oil boiler or even a gas stove, particularly in a smaller space, there's a lot of recent research about the impact of methane emissions from gas stoves, even when they're operating as they should. That's a little bit scary. Community awareness. One of the reasons why these technologies are not as widely adopted in our country is we are less educated as a nation about clean energy technology. And there's a lot of reasons for that we can talk about. So we also work with a program that I'm just going to mention because we all live in towns, villages, cities, right? And there's a program called Clean Energy Communities, which actually incentivizes municipal governments to do various kinds of high-impact actions in their communities. Like, for example, they can benchmark their energy footprint, meaning that they can audit all of their operations, transportation, if they do waste management, the heating and cooling of their buildings, all of it. And that gives them a place to say, all right, here's where we are, and we can now plan based on that benchmark where we want to go. So our role in that is that these kinds of campaigns are part of one of the high-impact actions. And so if a certain number of people within a municipality, we're sitting in Vestal here, but we're actually working more with Endicott and Town of Union and others right now. If enough people get work done, sign contracts and get work done, the given municipality where those people live gets a certain number of points towards monetary awards. So Endicott is the example I called up. There are neighbors across the river. We're working with the village and with the mayor there. We've had some online programs. We're looking to have some more of these sort of programs. And for the village of Endicott, which is a small place, population-wise, it's just 5 contracts, 3 energy efficiency and 2 heat pumps for them to get those points. So our program covers 3 types of heat pump technologies plus weatherization. These are our competitively selected partners. So air source heat pumps, also known as mini splits. Our primary air source partner is Air Source LLC, located in Greene in Shenango County. NP Environmental, we actually need to update this because they're doing more than just Delaware County at this point. They are a heat pump company. They do both air source and ground source. Daily Geothermal is a primary ground source contractor. And then what's called Home Performance, which is sort of an interesting brand word for energy efficiency, insulation, air sealing, reducing your carbon footprint in the home. So let's talk about the first one. So weatherization and energy efficiency, for a lot of reasons, are the single most important thing that you can do, right? It's important for us to switch from using dirty energy to clean energy. It's important for us to not burn things to heat and cool our homes. But the most important thing is use less. use less. So just in general, we want to bring down the amount of materials, the amount of energy that we consume. And in the wealthy world, of which we are a part, we consume the lion's share of the global resources. And so that means we have an even greater responsibility to bring down the amount of impact we have on the planet. There are other benefits. We've talked about these: reducing costs, home comfort and safety. So I've had a lot of work done on my house now some years ago. And when you insulate your home, obviously your thoughts may go to, I'm going to be warmer in the winter, and that's true. But you're also going to be cooler in the summer. Having a well-insulated home basically keeps the conditioned air in your home at the temperature you want for longer. So even if your system goes down, right, it's going to hold that air at that temperature for a longer period if it's insulated than if it's not. We live in a very wet part of the country, right? It's a very damp sort of place, this part of the country. And it's very important when this sort of work is done that humidity and moisture is factored in, right? So just to give you an example, before I had my house insulated, whoever owned it before us, for whatever reason, decided to vent the downstairs bathroom right into the attic. And when the house is leaky, that wasn't a problem, right? Because everything was just leaking. But once you tighten up a house, you don't want to have stuff that's kept in the house that you don't like, right? Which could be gases from combustion, and it could also be moisture. So then, sort of a historical note, we now have equipment, one thing that's called a blower door, which is a big fan that fits in a front door that has a meter, and that essentially is powerful enough to blow enough air out of the home when you close all the windows to create what's called negative pressure. And that means that where there are gaps in the building envelope, you can actually feel the air coming in. But we didn't used to have that. And the way that energy efficiency contractors used to detect where homes were a problem, big icicles and ice dams. Right? So if you have big icicles and ice dams, you know that the warm air that you're paying to heat is not staying where it ought to stay. And that obviously has other impacts. Ice dams can wreck your gutters. They can create havoc with their structure in various ways over the years. So here is a model of a home that has some issues. But let's first sort of describe what we're looking at. So this area here is what we refer to as the building envelope, unless we decide that we want to condition the basement. If we want to heat and cool, then we'd be drawing it here. But basically, the building envelope is that part of the building that stands between the area that you want to condition, either hot or cold, and the rest of the world, outside or inside. So oftentimes our basements are not conditioned space, right? Sometimes they're left out of the picture. So when a house is built, you have to penetrate the building envelope for a lot of different services, right? You've got the dryer vent, you've got plumbing doing various things. Here you have an air conditioner, and there's a line in there. And if you don't carefully seal around those penetrations, that's a place where air can come in. And they're very small often, but they add up very quickly, both in terms of the amount of conditioned air that can escape and what that'll cost you. The other thing that happens, because hot air rises within these structures, if there's penetrations that are not sealed up in your basement, and in the upper story you have the same issue, you can essentially be drawing the air from your basement through your house. And that's not a great idea, because our basement air is often not our best air. So when insulation work is done, obviously the upper story is the most important, right? The attic, or depending on the construction of your house. My house is what's called a Cape Cod. It has a really big walk-in attic and a couple of bedrooms and a bathroom on the upper story. And for that reason, the way it's designed, we do what's called a hot roof, which in this case, I got foam sprayed right on to the underside of the roof. In other homes, it makes sense to put in cellulose insulation right here. It really depends. And that's part of the reason why the question that we probably get asked most frequently, which is how much? And the answer that I give most frequently is it depends. So the analogy that I'd like to make is, let's say I am your general practitioner, your doctor. We're sitting right here, and one of you say, "Doctor, what's wrong with me, and how much is it going to take to fix you?" I haven't examined you. I haven't done any tests. I don't really know. You can tell me your symptoms. But until the tests and the exam is done, it's hard to give a good number. And I could give you a number that would either be too high or too low for your home. And we tend to sort of fixate on numbers. We could talk about ranges, but it's an important element. All right, in the interest of time, I think we're going to move on to talk about heat pump technologies. Who has a heat pump in their house right now? Raise your hand. You are wrong. You're not wrong, but there also you're wrong. You all have refrigerators and freezers, which all contain heat pumps. This is my stock trick question that Anna is probably insanely bored with right now. But heat pumps are not very mysterious, and they're not very new. But what heat pumps that are used for heating and cooling can do is go in both directions. So when you are by your refrigerator, freezer, what do you notice about the temperature outside of that appliance in your kitchen? Right, so it's warm, right? And that is because the heat pump is, in essence, extracting heat from these insulated boxes at different levels, right? The freezer, it's extracting more heat than the refrigerator, and you have a thermostat to control that. And that uses what's called the refrigeration cycle. In the case of a heat pump, you can reverse the refrigeration cycle depending on the season and what it is you want to do. Do you want, in the case of a geothermal system, to be bringing heat from the ground and then bringing that to your heat pump, which does certain things that I'll talk about, and then distribute that heat? Or is it the summer? Do you want to be extracting heat from your house, putting it into the ground? Or conversely, with air source heat pumps, do you want to do that with the air? So there are three basic types of heat pumps, and there's two jobs that we need to get done with these heat pumps: space heating and cooling, and hot water heating. So these are far and away, when we go back to that percentage that buildings make up in terms of greenhouse gas, both in terms of energy use and greenhouse gas, these are the biggies, right? This is where we spend most of our money on utilities and most of our energy in homes. So ground source heat pumps or geothermal heat pumps can do both things. And as you can see, air source does this, and heat pump water heater does this. I have 2 out of the 3 in my own home. So let's go into it a little bit. So the first thing I want to say about ground source heat pumps or geothermal is we want to be clear on what sort of geothermal we're talking about. We are talking about the heat in the ground that's there because of what? Where does the heat in the ground, the first, say, 10 feet, where is that coming from? What's the ultimate source of that heat? The sun. Is there another source of heat on the earth that doesn't come from the sun? Yes. And so there's another form of geothermal, which you could refer to as hot rocks geothermal, that actually taps into that. Now, if you go down to a place like Costa Rica that has a lot of volcanism, right? They have volcanoes, they have a lot of magma close to the surface. They tap into that, and it's actually very simple. You use that heat to boil water to run turbines. And when you have it that close to the surface, it's actually really cheap. So a place like Costa Rica, which is actually one of the leaders globally in clean energy, they don't have as much solar as you might think because geothermal is so readily available. And cheap. Is there a country we can think about that has, let's call it geothermal to burn in this regard? It's pretty famous for this. It's a very small country. Yes. Iceland is a country that has some really wild natural conditions, and one of them is that they have a lot of tectonic activity, a lot of volcanism, and so their small country, they can power a lot just with boiling water from the magma to create turbine action, which generates electricity or whatnot. But this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the heat that's very close to the surface that comes from the sun. So there's three parts to a heat pump system. In the case of geothermal, the loop field is the first piece. The second piece is the heat pump itself, which you could think of as analogous to your furnace or boiler. And then there's a distribution system, which most houses have. So looking around this room, where's the distribution system for heating and cooling? This is a commercial building, so it's a little different than your house. Yeah. We have these ceiling vents for both hot and cold. What other kinds of distribution systems do we have? Homeowners, call them out. What do you have in your home? Well, I have hot water baseboard. Yeah. Gas fireplace. But in terms of a house-wide distribution system, forced air is very common, right? Furnaces. Yeah, so typically you have air and water-based, right? Water-based can also be called hydronic. Electric also. And so these are all distribution systems. These are means by which energy is turned into heat and distributed around your house. And in the case of forced air systems, you can blow hot and cold, right? So you can have a central air conditioning system. Similarly, with heat pumps, you're going to need a way to distribute that heat and that cooling. And the two technologies are rather different in that regard. But first, in terms of the ground loops, these are loops that continuously circulate a fluid that conducts energy back and forth to the earth using this mushy stuff called grout. So basically, in my backyard, I've got two 275-foot wells that are maybe about this wide. And there's a tube that's going up and around and into the house to the heat pump. Heat is conducted one way or the other, depending on what I want to do, whether I want to heat or want to cool my house, to the earth. So in effect, my backyard is my battery. In the summertime, I'm getting that heat from the sun, right? It's being conducted by the loop field to the heat pump. And then we get into the refrigeration cycle. So that is then transferred to a refrigerant, and that's a gas. And that refrigerant boils at a very, very low temperature. And so we're already starting with a refrigerant that's going to be boiling just from the 40 to 50 something degree temperature that's coming in off that loop field. But in order to bring that up to what's called a heating temperature, we've got to do something else. We have to compress it, right? And that is actually where most of the electricity, most of the energy, most of the cost of operating heat pumps comes in, is in the compressor. You compress a gas, and I'll bet this guy could probably tell us that when you compress a gas, it gets hotter, right? You're packing those molecules in. And so these are two typical types of loop fields. There are other varieties, but so I have the vertical, right, which involves wells. Horizontal is cheaper because you're just trenching, but it involves a lot of disturbance of the surface. So if you don't have that surface to disturb, or you don't even have that property, you're going to be doing wells. I did wells. This is a very versatile technology. Yes, sir. It depends. So in the case of my wells, they're 275 feet deep. One of the things that well drillers try to avoid is going below 500 feet, because then you start to get into mining regulations. So for that reason, and it's also cheaper actually to drill two shallower wells than one very deep one, typically. And the people who do the well drilling are almost always the same people who do well drilling for residential water wells. And it's very important to have people that understand the geology, because the conductivity depends on the geology. And the geology can vary kind of amazingly from one place to another, even within a few miles. And so it's important when you're doing geothermal to understand geothermal. It is not the same thing as putting in a conventional boiler or furnace. All right, so then there's the heat pump, the distribution system. And so in terms of the benefits, because of the fact that you're using the ground as your battery, that's the most efficient way to do heat pump heating and cooling. There are some disadvantages of geothermal and some advantages of air source heat pumps that I'll get into. The loop fields typically last, well, let's just say they're going to last longer than most of the adults in this room, not the kids, hopefully, but 60, 70, 80 years is not uncommon for loop fields. The heat pump, a good long life for a heat pump, 20 years. Typically, there's going to be a warranty of some sort for at least 10. This is variable according to the manufacturer and according to the installer. Eliminate fossil fuels from your home. So in my own case, those of you who remember 2008, when maybe we thought that was as high as number 2 heating oil was ever going to get in price. Of course, we were wrong, because right now it's a lot higher than that. It was about $4.05, $4.10. Now I think it's like $4.75, $4.80, something like that. That's extreme pain financially. My house is big-ish and old-ish, and it was pretty clear that I couldn't afford to keep going. So I decided to invest in my home by getting insulation and getting a heat pump. And in my case, my oil boiler just decided to quit on me even as the installation process was happening. So I just had the whole thing hauled away, tank and everything. And this is my primary heating system. I do have a wood stove insert. And one thing that's important to note, that if the power goes out, it doesn't matter if you have a gas system, an oil system, or a geothermal system, you're not going to be able to run it, because you can't fire up conventional systems without electricity. Unless, of course, you have an electrical backup system, which we can talk about if we want to later. Can include domestic hot water. So there's a feature called a desuperheater that can take additional energy to heat domestic hot water in addition. Now, okay. One thing about geothermal, it is a whole house solution. You do not do geothermal if you just want to tweak a couple of rooms here and there. The other thing about geothermal is that you are talking about a house-wide distribution system with air source heat pumps, ductless heat pumps. They're called ductless for a reason. And the reason is that these exterior units, right, which are the units that are drawing heat from the air, and they're moving it to these different types of air handlers, they're umbilically connected. They can completely bypass your existing system. There are some houses that, for various reasons, don't even have an existing distribution system. That's relatively rare. But sometimes the distribution system, for whatever reason, the ducts are too small, the hydronic system isn't going to really be very practical to convert. It is going to work better to use this. And the other way in which air source is better is that you can say, all right, I've got these 2 rooms in my house that are just uncomfortable. Right? They're too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter. We're just going to hit those 2 rooms. Or you can do a whole house solution with air source as well. So some of the same advantages, but the flexibility, right? The full heating replacement not required. So there are some very concrete reasons why air source. From a policy perspective, we want to do as much ground source as we can. Reason being, what do we need to run these things? What's the fuel source for heat pumps? Electricity, right. So let's say we bring, you all have homes, probably most of them are heated with fossil fuels. That means we're going to what? Increase the amount of electricity that the system needs to provide to you. And because geothermal is the most efficient way to do this, it's important to do as much of that as we possibly can. There are some structures where it's just simply not going to work to do geothermal. And so it's really important to get an assessment that is specific to your structure. And I did want to mention geothermal is a marvelously flexible technology. St. Patrick's Cathedral, geothermal. I mean, it's not obviously a very typical building. They can plan with a century in mind, and they decided to go with geothermal. There are holes in the bedrock that go down almost 1,000 feet. But There's no cooling towers, right? When you have air conditioning systems, conventional ones, you have cooling towers that sit on, they didn't want a cooling tower sitting on top of a spire or whatnot, right? Everything is self-contained within the building, right? There's nothing to see. There's nothing to smell. There's nothing to hear. Similarly, campus or district geothermal essentially moves heat around from where you don't want it to where you do want it. So an example would be, say a small village, you've got a supermarket which needs both heating and cooling at all times, right? Because the supermarket, even in the wintertime, needs to keep certain things cold, right? And in the wintertime, it also needs to be warm for the customers not to freeze. And so heat can be moved out of that space into a neighboring office building, say, or a home. Campuses like college campuses are particularly suited for doing this. And one of the reasons is a college campus or other kinds of campuses, there's one owner, right? One decider. And you can engineer that system to move the heat around depending on the needs of each of those buildings over the course of the year. So it's kind of fun. Heat pump hot water heaters, mundane but nice. It's basically an electric hot water heater with a heat pump, an air source heat pump sitting on top of it. My water heater recently died. I got one of these. And it has some advantages in addition to not burning things. This heat pump will actually provide dehumidification. And the way that it reduces the amount of energy that you need in terms of electricity is, like any good heat pump, it's going to extract heat from, in this case, the air. You can't put these in just anywhere. You can't put them in an area that's very small and confined. There needs to be enough air circulation. The ideal situation, which I'm fortunate enough to have, is for it to be in a semi-conditioned space. So it's in a finished basement in an equipment room that has louvers, so the air exchanges a little bit with the outside room, so that it can draw in heat from the equipment in the room and a little bit from outside, but it's not sucking in tons of heat that's being used to condition the space. So I have gone on quite a long time, and at this point I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Anna. Here's your clicker. And she's going to talk about incentives and financing, and then we're going to shift things a little bit to community solar, and then we will take your questions.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. And I know you were all probably here mostly to hear about the technologies and the science sort of behind heat pumps and weatherization, but I'm going to talk relatively briefly about the incentives and financing available to you if you were to actually get this system installed in your home. But before I begin, I do want to mention that these projects do have an upfront cost. However, over time, they should be paid back in full. Like Adam was talking about, the price of electricity is much more stable and lower than the price of fuel, like fossil fuels. So although it does have an upfront cost, it will be paid back. And also you can lower the upfront cost with these incentives and financing that I will talk about. So this is kind of an overwhelming looking table, but you don't have to read it all. I'll summarize it very quickly. These are the incentives offered by NYSEG. So if you're a NYSEG customer, these apply to you. So basically they are broken down on the left, as you can see, by the different types of technology. So the top is air source heat pumps, and then we have our ground source, and then the heat pump water heaters. And so for the air source heat pumps, you can get a range of $500 to a few $1,000s for incentives through NYSEG. For ground source, you can get $1,500 per heating capacity of your home. So that just depends on how much energy your home needs. For the heat pump hot water heater, it ranges from $100 to $900 per unit, and that just depends on the type of hot water heater that you get. And then here are the eligibility requirements, which I won't go into, but you can read further on your own, and you can ask us later if you have questions about that. So those are the NYSEG incentives. Next, there are some heat pump tax credits that you can take advantage of. So for air source, there's a federal tax credit of $300. For ground source, there is a federal tax credit of 30%, which can be pretty significant. And then also a state tax credit of 25% up to $5,000. And then for the heat pump water heater, there's also a federal tax credit of $300. Actually, before I go on, I did want to mention also that the Inflation Reduction Act is going to be coming out with some new incentives in the future that are pretty unclear yet to exactly what they're going to be to everybody, but those should be coming out in early 2023, right?
The first part of 2023.
Yeah.
Depending on what the state of New York needs to do in terms of programs.
Yeah.
So two things. One is that neither ourselves nor the installers are permitted to give you legal tax advice. So take what I'm going to say with a grain of salt. And what I'm going to say is I'm actually 100% certain. I know that when I was taking my tax credits, we didn't. But honestly, ask your accountant. These have been around enough. You'll be able to hear a proper answer. I will say one thing that's fairly obvious. You need to pay taxes in order to use tax credit. And the more tax credit that you're going to take, the more what's called tax appetite you need to have. So in my own case with the geothermal system, these are 10 years ago prices, but the gross cost was 24 grand, 30% brought it down to 8,000. So I don't pay enough, or didn't pay enough federal taxes to take 8,000 year one. So I basically took 3,000 and change. 3,000 and change year two, and there's
So is called Assisted Home Performance with Energy Star, and this is also through NYSERDA. So this provides those who apply with a discount of 50% of project costs, and the income eligibility for this program is you have to be at or below 80% of the area median income, and you can see the income limits right there. But that's a really good option for low to moderate income. And then the other program is another low to moderate income program. But for this one, you have to have a slightly lower income, so you have to be at or below 60% of this area median income. And that gets you up to, I think we have to change that. It's up to $10,000 off of full project costs. Yeah, this slide is not updated. But it is up to $10,000 off of your project costs. And that can actually also be flexible if you need a little bit extra, that they can be flexible with that. And that includes weatherization and heat pump projects. If you're a municipal customer, there's also some incentives that you can take advantage of, which I won't go through, but they're fairly similar to the NYSEG incentives, but that's just if you're a municipal electric customer and not a NYSEG customer.
And so they have these incentives as opposed to the ones from NYSEG.
Then one thing we like to mention is the difference between a residential energy audit and a full energy audit. So if you were to go through this program, you would likely get an energy audit if you're interested in getting installation or weatherization work done. But the difference between a residential energy audit and a full energy audit is that a residential energy audit is free for anyone, but it does not include diagnostic testing. So it would just be an expert would come to your home and sort of look around, do like a base walkthrough and not do any sort of testing. So that's free, but a full energy audit, if you wanted to get the full testing, so like the blower door, like Adam was talking about before, or like the infrared cameras. If you're a market rate customer, you do have to pay a fee for that. If you are low to moderate income, it can be free if you fill out an application and you also have a project done. So just the difference between the two of those is good to note, because a lot of people think that energy audits are always free, which is not the case. All right, so if you are actually interested in signing up for any of the systems that we talked about today, these would be the steps for participating. Number 1, you would fill out this enrollment form that we gave everybody. That would give us all your information. Then we would contact you and connect you with one of our vetted partner installers that we talked about before. Then that installer would sort of take over. They would give you a quote for whatever energy improvements that you needed. You would then apply for the incentives and financing if that was applicable to you. Then you would sign a contract for whatever systems you decided on, and then you would get the installation work done. So now kind of switching gears over from the clean heating and cooling, I'm going to talk a little bit about what community solar is. So that is the second packet that you've all received. So we do have this new community solar program that is launching very soon that we're getting people signed up for. So in general, what community solar is an opportunity to get your energy from solar power without actually having to get solar panels installed on your home. So a lot of us have homes that don't have the economic means or like the physical means to actually install solar panels on our homes. If we, rent our home, or if your home is very shaded and doesn't get a lot of sun. So this is like Adam's house. And so this is an opportunity for you if you are a proponent of solar power and you want to take advantage of that energy, but you can't actually get it installed in your home. So how it works is you have a big solar field like this, that you're basically getting a subscription basically to part of a solar field. So it requires no cost to sign up. You just basically subscribe to this solar farm, and you don't actually get your energy from there, but you're paying for whatever energy comes out of there. And for the program that we're doing, you get an automatic 20% discount off of your electricity bill from signing up for community solar. So it sounds too good to be true, but it's not. You sign up for this program, it's free to sign up, and then you get 20% off of your electricity bill. So the project that we're doing right now is in Dickinson, correct? It's in the town of Dickinson, but you don't have to be a resident of the town of Dickinson. You can be anywhere basically in the southern tier. A NYSEG customer. Yes. And it is an income eligible program, which we can let you know what the income eligibility requirements are for that. There should be a table on the back page of the community solar packet if you wanted to check if you'd be eligible. But this is our new community solar program that we are launching. Yeah, so like I said, you can get 20% savings annually on your NYSEG bill, supporting renewable energy. So right now we're just taking pre-enrollments because the project hasn't actually been started yet, but we're just taking pre-enrollments to see who might be interested, and then we would be contacting people later on to get them actually signed up. All right, are there any questions at this time?
So with the solar panels, what you're actually doing is you're renting space in the solar farm for but you actually own the solar panels.
Not in this case. There is a model that's like that, and that's less usual. That's an ownership model, and that does exist, but that's not the case here, and it's not the case for most of the projects. Renovis in Ithaca has a couple of projects like that where you're literally buying panels. In this case, you are subscribing to a certain number of kilowatts. So depending, basically when we do an actual sign up as opposed to this get in line kind of thing, we needed an electric bill, And based on that, we can, or the developer can determine about how much electricity you use in your home over the course of 12 months. And so we don't live at the equator, and that means that in the summertime, obviously, it's more light, more sun, in the wintertime less. The idea is to calculate over the entire year how much energy you use and make sure. You're paying, it's being calculated yearly. However, so in terms of the mechanism, once there's an actual contract, say you sign the contract today, it's like mid-October. The developer every month will send a report to the utility, NYSEG, saying, here are these customers. They need to be credited on their bill with this much solar electricity every month. And so then the utility has 90 days to flip the switch, so to speak. And once that happens, then you start seeing your credits on your NYSEG bill. Now, let's say for whatever reason you decide you want out. You then reverse the process. You tell the developer, we don't want to continue with this. The developer tells the utility, and with 90 days, they do it. So the only, no, there's no fees other than what you're paying for. So basically, you're paying 80 cents on the dollar for electricity. That's how it works. So there's no fee for anything. You're basically paying for the electricity that you're subscribing to, but you're paying 20% less than what you were paying. And I think we have a question here.
The last 3%.
No, but you know what? I'm going to turn things over to Anna, and I'm going to look up the answer to your question, because I admire this curiosity, and I want to. I'm sorry?
Could be nature.
I'm not thinking yes, but let's find out. In the meanwhile,
So, I live in a conventional home that's going to be 50 years old next year. It's in pretty good shape. I have conventional heating, air, electrical. If I went through a system and rehabilitated or refurbished the house with heat pump, solar, how much would I save in terms of the efficiencies
Of the new mechanics over what I have today, is there any kind of rule of thumb that you can offer for that?
so not a great rule of thumb, but we can ask some questions to try and drill down a little bit. So what fuel do you use to heat with now?
Yes,
And what?
in Kansas.
Oh, okay. So the other thing I should say is that those NYSEG incentives obviously do not exist in Kansas.
Yeah, right.
The federal tax credits you can take anywhere in the
Correct.
United States.
Correct.
So that's going to affect your economics right there.
Correct.
I don't know what, if anything, Kansas has to offer in that regard. I know, for example, Pennsylvania, which is awfully close to us, has exactly nothing.
Right. We have nothing either.
Yeah. So what's the distribution system? Do you have a furnace or do you have a boiler? Is it
Furnace.
a furnace? So it's
Furnace
ducts.
outside air conditioner.
A central air conditioner?
Yes,
Okay.
2.
How many square feet is the house, roughly?
3,500 square feet.
Okay. And you say it's about 50 years old.
Yep.
What's the building style?
Ranch,
Ranch.
wood.
So it's a
Make sure.
single story?
Yeah.
Okay. What are you paying either monthly or annually now, do you think?
For
heating and
electricity?
cooling? Yeah, I mean, in this case, you're using electricity for your air conditioning, right?
Right. I'm paying about, say, $350 a month in the summertime, and in the wintertime for gas, which wintertime there is only 3 months, right?
In Kansas? Really?
So, yeah, so I pay,
My ex's family is from Kansas. I don't think it's
so I
3
pay
months.
200. Well, no. Half of December, January, February, half of March. So 3 months is wintertime.
Yeah,
And
If
it
you're
gets
lucky.
shorter every year.
it's true.
So I
Well,
pay-
it does
I
get shorter
pay
every
maybe
year.
$350, $1,000 a month, or $1,000 for those 3 months.
Okay.
So $350 a month. And then I pay more in electricity each year than I do in natural gas.
All right, so
So I paid $6,000 in utilities last year.
one final, I think,
That's water
question.
too.
how much property do you have around the home? And just looking at this wells versus trench thing, what do you think? If it was geothermal as opposed to
Oh, I have plenty of room to put it.
plenty of room? Okay, so you could probably do trenches. Because you're using natural gas, your simple payback is going to be longer certainly for geothermal than for air source. For air source, is a lot of your home like open concept for like the kitchen and the dining room and the living room, and then it's all rooms?
All rooms.
Okay. That can mean, and it doesn't have to mean, but that can mean you're going to need more air handlers. And that essentially comes down to, is there a way to move air from one bedroom to another that's going to really work, and other things that I can't really say. So to be honest, I'm coming back to the same thing. You can get a heat pump contractor in, get a quote, and pay nothing for it.
Right.
So I will say, rule of thumb, gas is a cheaper fuel. So generally speaking, you're not going to have the best economics compared to somebody like me who is using heating oil. And then another consideration is, what's your longevity in this house? Are you intending to stay there as long as you can? Or are you going to pass it along to people? Are you going to sell it?
Right.
So these are all things that figure into it. I'll say one other thing about not the heat pump, but the energy efficiency audit. For all of us that have bought homes, hopefully we all hired a home inspector, right, before we bought our home, to review all of the systems, not just the energy, but the plumbing, the wiring, the roof, the everything. I think it's just really good for a homeowner to have an energy audit at least once, to know what's going on in your home as far as energy. It's sort of benchmarking for your home. It is kind of unfortunate that by market rate customers, we basically mean people who are not able to qualify for those programs, right? That it is now not a free item, but the cost averages around $300, $350, and it depends entirely on the size and complexity of the home. I'm gonna still work on this. It's not happening as fast as I'd like. But did we have any other questions? I know we have your question, which I still haven't yet.
We are in a solar farm. We bought 25 panels, and Renovus is a company.
Oh, yeah.
It's up at Ithaca someplace.
I just mentioned them. I know them well. Yeah.
And they're 25 panels, and we get a rebate on the bill with NYSEG every month, and it comes about $75, $100 a month. So it's pretty nice to have.
What did it cost you for the investment?
20-some thousand. We bought 25 panels.
And does that go on into perpetuity?
Yeah, it should last 25 years or so, they tell me.
Or the
And I
panels?
pay a yearly maintenance fee for them to clean them and all that kind of stuff.
And you get 75 a month.
Yeah, but our house doesn't face enough south, even though we thought it did, so we went with this field. Works pretty well. Also, in July, we had an air source heat pump system installed. So I guess we're kind of preaching to the choir here or something, but still, it's been fantastic. The outfit that put it in was Bodek Plumbing. They're excellent, they really are. And it's a Mitsubishi system, and it's been great. Air conditioning in the summer and heat in the winter. So far, anyway.
That's great to hear. Are there any other questions?
We do have some questions from the live stream.
Yeah.
So a couple from Stacy here. So Stacy asks, since we're so close to the PA border, are there any incentives that you know about for Pennsylvania?
I'm afraid I addressed that a moment ago. There are none.
There are none. Okay.
Yeah, no, Pennsylvania as a state is not incentivizing clean energy. So the only incentives that work are the federal incentives.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
And then a follow-up. How much does it cost to do the paid energy audit with diagnostics?
Again, it's, I don't know why I'm staring at you when
I know.
The average is about $350. And again, if you qualify for one of the low and moderate income programs, it can be free. If you get work done. For the rest of us, the average is around $350, and it depends on how large your home is, how complicated it is. So it's basically a time and materials sort of affair.
All right. That's it for the live stream. Any other questions from the audience at this point?
I haven't forgotten you. Oh,
Well,
yes, sir, go ahead.
Between vertical wells and trench, does it just come down to if you have the space for a trench, it's better because it's cheaper up front and otherwise they're equivalent?
Yeah, there's really no engineering advantage in terms of efficiency or whatnot to drilling wells. And I mean, well drilling equipment uses diesel, right? I mean, that's how it works. And so,
Excavators use diesel when they dig up your whole yards.
not necessarily, but they can. There are other ways of doing it, but yeah, there's just more energy that goes into drilling wells, regardless of where it comes from, than trenching, and it's just a more costly process. So if you have the space, I mean, if I have the space, but the nature of my yard is such that it would have just completely destroyed gardens, trees, all kinds of things. So I did not do that. But if you do it, yeah, it's definitely
Do
doable.
the trenches have to be level or can they go down a hill if you are on a
I
hill?
think they, I'm not 100% certain about that question. I think so, but that's another one of those I would want to get back to you with the answer. And if I can't find an answer, is this your son? If I can't get an answer, I really want to get back to you. Because I'm actually looking at some of the New York State agency reports, and they're not saying anything about that 3%. So I'll probably find it the moment you walk out of the room, but I have not been able to find it yet.
Top name on your list, so I'm on.
Okay. I will make a note. And I also have your email, and I can read it. All right. What's your name?
We're
No,
both
you're-
Stan. We're both Stan.
Oh, you're both Stan. Well, Stan, I like your curiosity. Keep it up. I know we may be at time at this point. Any final questions? We can obviously talk to people informally for a bit.
So obviously a good time to switch from your legacy fossil fuel system to geothermal is when your furnace or whatever is dead or dying.
Well, no, not when it's dead, because if you wait until it's dead, you cannot do geothermal turning on a dime. It takes time to do that.
Until it is the year that you decide it's, well, whatever.
You should, it's sort of like, I'm spending money every year calling in the furnace people to fix this thing. It's clearly getting towards the end of its useful life. You don't want to wait until the last minute, because you wait till the last minute, typically what happens is whatever somebody's has on the truck that comes out for the emergency call at midnight on Christmas Eve that's what you're getting. And then you're locked in for another 15, 20 years. So yeah, no, what you say is right, and it's a bit of a personal frustration that we don't have a way of knowing who is in that situation, because that is the natural step.
But if you have a house and you've got your furnace and you have your hot water heater or two and your air conditioner or two outside, and they're all failing in every staggered few years, they last for 15 years, 10 years here and whatnot. I mean, if you go geothermal, you could sort of combine all of those. In any one of those years when you have to pony up $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 is the year.
Assuming that you have a central air system. I mean, a lot of people either don't have or they have window air conditioners. And window air conditioners are expensive to run. So yeah, I mean, alas, when we're talking about retrofitting, which is what we're talking about for most of us, there's no like, wow, this is so perfect. What is really perfect? No new construction should have anything but a heat pump in it. When you do new construction, all of your worries about cost and all the other things just go right away, because you designed the house with that in mind, and it's so nice. And you can orient your roof south-facing, you can do all the things. You can have the electrical system wired so that you can get the electric vehicles as well, on and on and on. But, we have existing buildings, we are going to need to do this. So, yeah, there's certainly, obviously, time. Another time is when houses change hands, right? The buying and selling. I mean, usually the outgoing owner, if you will, is not going to pay money for a new system unless the system's there is so bad, they're not going to sell the place, right? So, new home buyers, that's another good moment. My apologies. All right, well, we should probably wrap it up so that you all can go and watch the stars. I'll take one more, and then I'll take questions offline after we...
Yeah. In the past year, how many systems have you sold?
All right, so first, we don't sell any systems. Our role is to educate and connect, and also we have no financial skin in the game with this. So you have somebody else you can talk to if you're having any issues or you have any questions. If those questions are more technical than we can handle, we can call on NYSERDA's people, we can call on Cadmus, which is one of their contractors. So we have access to a lot of expertise beyond what we know. In terms of how many systems we have been responsible for, I'll tell you why I'm hemming and hawing about this. Say that you see one of these and you go to our website and you see those contractors and say, oh, I'm just going to reach right out to AirSource LLC. We never find out. So I would say that at the end of the day, we'll probably be responsible for about 50 systems. We're not there yet, but that's our goal by the end of next year. In terms of how much business is being done by the heat pump industry, this is not a number I have in my head, but actually two other things I should mention. All of you know this because you probably are trying to get contractors to do something else at your house. People are backed up a lot. So if you think you want to get this, my advice is get in line. Sign up for a free assessment, get the assessment. If it turns out you're going to do something, you don't have to do it immediately. There may be some additional incentives or whatnot with the IRA in the new year. But I'll say that our contractors now, nobody's actually booking work, actual installs in this year. Everybody's now booking into the following year. So that I think is a really important note that unfortunately, for reasons that I think many of us know, we have to wait a while. So I am at this point going to stop the formal program, but we can continue to chat afterwards. And I just want to thank our online audience and our host, Jeremy, and my colleague Anna, and everybody for coming, and enjoy your clear skies.
Thank you, Adam and Anna, for that terrific program. So we're going to open up the telescopes at this stage, and we have clear skies. So welcome you to go out to the observatory and look at the planets and the stars. And I will meet you out there. We'll do a star tour as well. And those on the live stream, we will see you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. So, Stanley. Okay. So I'm going to email you.